Her voice cut through the thick, angry air of the conference room, sharp and cold despite the oppressive heat. She stood at the head of the long table, a portrait of manufactured outrage, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at me. "This is not the fault of the board," she announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is the result of gross incompetence. She is the one who broke our system, a system that has worked perfectly for years. She is the one to blame." The faces of the condo owners turned toward me. Dozens of pairs of eyes, all filled with the same frustrated resentment. They were hot, they were miserable, and they had just been given a target for their anger. My boss, seated beside me, shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. I just stood there, my professional mask firmly in place, while the most powerful resident in the building publicly dismantled my reputation. It was the final, calculated humiliation. My name is Audrey, and for 10 years, I was the building manager for one of the more prestigious high-rises in New York City. My job was to be invisible. If I did my work perfectly, the lives of the hundreds of people in my care would flow without interruption. The elevators would arrive, the water would be hot, and the temperature would be comfortable. My domain was a complex ecosystem of people and machinery. Of all the systems I managed, the most delicate was the building's central heating and cooling. It was an old, powerful system, a relic of a different time. It had one major quirk: it was a one-way street. Sometime in the fall, we had to make the call to shut down the building's air conditioning and switch over to heat. Once that massive change was made, there was no going back. The boilers would be firing, the pipes would be full of hot water, and we would be locked into heating mode until the following spring. For 9 years, I had perfected this balancing act. I watched long-range forecasts, I monitored overnight lows, and I waited for the perfect moment to make the switch. It was a point of pride. But that all changed last year because of our new board president. She lived in the penthouse, a sprawling apartment with panoramic views of the city. Her sense of entitlement was just as vast. She treated the building not as a community, but as her personal hotel, and me as her private concierge. Last October, we had an unseasonably chilly day. It was a brief dip in temperature, the kind that happens before a final wave of autumn warmth. I knew it would pass. She, however, felt a slight chill in her penthouse and decided it was an emergency. A blistering email arrived in my inbox that afternoon. It was not a request, but a command. She demanded that I activate the building's heat immediately. She didn't stop there. She laid down a new, permanent rule for the building. Going forward, she wrote, the heat was to be activated no later than October 1st, every single year, regardless of the weather forecast. She then wrote the sentence that I would never forget. "I don't care if other units will be uncomfortably warm," the email read. "My comfort is what's most important, and I expect you to do your job. I am a professional. I trust the chain of command, sometimes to a fault. It was a direct order from the president of the board of directors, so I followed her directive. The heat was turned on. But I am also meticulous. After I sent the confirmation to the engineering team, I moved her email into a special folder in my archive. I saved it. I always do. That brings us to this year. On October 1st, as instructed, I authorized the switch from air conditioning to heat. The system was activated exactly as the board president had demanded in writing. 3 days later, an unseasonable heat wave descended on the city. The temperature outside soared into the 80s. Inside our sealed glass building, with the heat silently radiating through every apartment, it was even worse. The luxury condos became unbearable saunas. Which is why I was now standing in this sweltering conference room, being publicly crucified. The president was playing her role perfectly, channeling the residents' fury away from herself and onto the most convenient scapegoat, me. She spoke of my supposed negligence, my failure to maintain the system, my lack of foresight. She never once mentioned her email. She never mentioned her direct order. In her mind, it probably never even happened. Her arrogance was a shield that protected her from facts and accountability. She finished her speech with a flourish, looking down at me with a pity that was more insulting than her anger. She was certain she had won. She was untouchable, the president of the board. I was just the staff. I met her gaze, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, however, a switch had been flipped. For years, my guiding principle was to avoid conflict, to do my job quietly and perfectly. But standing there, absorbing the collective anger for a problem she had created, I felt my professional deference finally crack. She had built this entire situation on a lie, confident that no one could challenge her. She was powerful, she was intimidating, and she held all the cards. But she had forgotten about the digital paper trail. She had forgotten about her own words. She had forgotten about the email, but I hadn't. And as I stood there, taking the heat in every sense of the word, I made a calm, quiet decision. It was time to remind her, and I would do it not with anger, but with simple, undeniable facts. Her voice finally stopped echoing in the silent, stuffy room. As the last of her accusations hung in the air, something inside me didn't break, it solidified. The hot flash of public shame I had felt just moments before was instantly replaced by an icy, focused calm. The angry murmuring from the residents faded into a dull background hum. My world narrowed to the long conference table, the projector screen behind the president, and the laptop sitting in front of me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer a single word in my own defense. I simply let her finish her performance, allowing her to feel the full, fleeting satisfaction of her supposed victory. She stood there, basking in the silence, believing she had won. Slowly, I turned my head just enough to catch my boss's eye. He looked worried, unsure of what to do. I kept my voice low and steady, a deliberate contrast to the president's shrill tirade. "Sir," I said, my tone perfectly even, "I have the official correspondence regarding this heating directive on my laptop. May I have your permission to display it for clarification?" His eyes widened slightly. A flicker of understanding crossed his face, quickly followed by a look of relief. He had been backed into a corner by her, and I had just offered him a way out. He gave me a single, firm nod. That was all the signal I needed. I pushed my chair back without a sound and stood up. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked calmly to the head of the table, where my laptop was already connected to the room's projector. My footsteps were measured, my movements filled with a purpose that silenced the remaining whispers. The board president watched me with a look of smug confusion. She couldn't comprehend what I was doing. In her world, staff did not challenge authority, they simply absorbed blame. Her arrogance was so complete that the idea of being proven wrong was not a possibility she could even entertain. I sat down and placed my hands on the keyboard. My email archive is my most powerful tool, a digital fortress of facts and meticulously organized records. For 10 years, every absurd request, every passive-aggressive complaint, and every direct order has been categorized, dated, and filed away. This isn't just about being organized. In a job like mine, it is a matter of professional survival. It is the silent, unimpeachable witness to every decision I am forced to make. It is the one thing that can cut through opinions and politics to reveal the simple truth. My fingers moved with practiced ease. I opened my archive, a clean interface that I knew as well as my own apartment. I navigated to the search bar, the cursor blinking patiently. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I began to type. From, and the president's name. The letters appeared on the screen, crisp and black. Then, subject, and a single word, heating. I pressed the enter key. The system processed the request for less than a second. Then, a single email popped up on the list. There it was, dated almost a year ago to the day. The subject line was clear. The sender was unmistakable. I looked at it for a moment, the digital proof of my innocence. The blueprint for her takedown wasn't some complex strategy I had to create. It was a document she had authored herself, in a fit of pique over a single chilly afternoon. She had written her own verdict and sent it to me with her own signature. She had been so sure of her own power, so certain of her untouchable status, that she had completely forgotten about it. All I had to do was press open. I moved the cursor, the small white arrow hovering over the subject line. This was the point of no return. This was the moment the quiet, invisible building manager showed everyone what it truly meant to keep a record of everything. I moved the cursor, the small white arrow hovering over the subject line. This was the point of no return. This was the moment the quiet, invisible building manager showed everyone what it truly meant to keep a record of everything. With a single, deliberate click of the mouse, I opened the file. The email instantly filled the large projector screen at the front of the room, its black text stark against the white background. It loomed behind the president's head like a monument to her own arrogance, 10 feet tall for all to see. Before the stunned residents had a chance to read it for themselves, I leaned forward and activated the small microphone on the table. I wanted them to hear the words in the same condescending tone she had used. I would be the narrator of her downfall. As per the board president's directive from last October, I announced, my voice amplified, perfectly clear and unwavering. It cut through the thick, humid air with absolute precision. I paused for a beat, letting the anticipation build. Then I began to read her words aloud. I quoted her directly, my voice devoid of any emotion, letting the text speak for itself. The heat is to be activated no later than October 1st. I don't care if other units will be uncomfortably warm. I took a short breath and delivered the final, damning sentence. My comfort is what's most important, and I expect you to do your job. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a sharp, unified sound of shock and dawning comprehension. In that instant, the narrative she had so carefully constructed was completely shattered. The target of their anger shifted so fast it was almost a physical force. I looked at her, the smug, condescending mask she wore as armor melted away in real time. The confident posture sagged. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a ghastly, pale shock. Her mouth fell slightly open. For the first time since I had met her, she was utterly, completely silent. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a heavy, judgmental quiet that pressed down on everyone in the room. It lasted for 5 long seconds. Then it was broken. A low wave of angry murmurs started at the back of the room and swept forward. Whispers of unbelievable and her comfort rippled through the crowd of owners. They weren't just hot and frustrated anymore. Now they were furious with the person who had knowingly and selfishly caused their misery. The president stood frozen, a deer in the headlights of her own words. Her power, which was always built on bluster and intimidation, had evaporated in an instant. It had no defense against the cold, hard proof of her own writing. I watched as the other board members, seated on either side of her, began to react. One by one, they subtly and deliberately angled their bodies away from her. It was a small, physical act of separation, a clear signal to everyone that she was now on her own. They were politicians, and she had just become toxic. The election for the board president position was on the agenda for later that evening. But in that moment, it was already over. There was no coming back from this. No speech or apology could erase the words still glowing on the screen behind her. She finally opened her mouth, perhaps to try and defend herself, to spin some new story. But no sound came out. She had nothing. The digital paper trail was absolute. She was ruined, and everyone in that room knew it. She was ruined, and everyone in that room knew it. My boss, seeing that the point had been made with devastating clarity, quietly reached over and turned off the projector. The giant image of the email vanished, but its words remained burned into everyone's memory. The rest of the meeting was a strange, muted affair. The angry, oppressive heat in the room seemed to have broken, replaced by an awkward chill. We moved through the remaining agenda items with a quiet efficiency. No one looked at the president. No one spoke to her. She just sat there, a hollowed-out version of the imperious woman who had entered the room an hour earlier. When the time came for the board election, it was a formality. A gentleman named Mr. Harrison, a kind-faced retired architect who lived on the 12th floor, was nominated to oppose her. The vote was a landslide, a near-unanimous decision that sealed her fate. She didn't react. She simply gathered her leather portfolio, stood on unsteady legs, and walked out of the room without a word. That was 6 months ago. Today, life is quiet, and the building is running perfectly. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that used to accompany my workday is gone. It has been replaced by the gentle, predictable rhythms of a well-managed building. The machinery hums, the residents are happy, and my phone doesn't ring with angry demands. The former president's departure was as swift as her fall from grace. Shamed and stripped of her authority, she put her penthouse on the market the very next week. I heard from the real estate agents that she sold it at a significant loss, desperate to escape the building where her own words had so publicly condemned her. One chilly morning in November, I saw the moving trucks parked out front. I watched from my office window as they loaded her expensive furniture and carefully packed boxes. I never saw her. By the time I walked through the lobby at the end of the day, there was no trace she had ever been there. She simply vanished from our lives. The new board president, Mr. Harrison, is her complete opposite. He is a thoughtful, considerate man who understands that my job is to be the expert. He treats me not as his personal staff, but as a trusted professional partner. Our weekly meetings are calm, productive, and based on mutual respect. One of the first things we discussed was the heating and cooling policy. He sat in my office, a cup of coffee in his hands, and simply asked, "Audrey, what is the most sensible way to handle the seasonal switchover to protect the residents and the equipment?" I explained my old method of monitoring long-range forecasts, of balancing the needs of the whole building. He listened patiently, nodding along. When I was finished, he just smiled. "That sounds perfectly logical. Let's make that the official policy. I trust your judgment implicitly." That trust extended to our company's contract negotiations. When our management contract came up for renewal, my boss was nervous. He remembered how the old president had threatened to replace us. But this time, the meeting was different. Mr. Harrison and the new board didn't try to squeeze our rates or question our value. Instead, he championed our work. He spoke of the building's newfound peace and my role in the unfortunate heating incident, as he called it. He presented me as an asset the building could not afford to lose. We were renewed for 5 more years. And when my boss showed me the final contract, he pointed to one specific line item. My salary had been given a significant raise, a direct result of the new board's insistence on rewarding my professionalism. Sometimes, when I walk the quiet halls in the evening, I think about that horrible meeting. I think about the humiliation and the anger. For 10 years, my greatest weakness was my deference to authority, my deep-seated need to avoid conflict. She used that against me, believing it made me powerless. But she was wrong. My greatest strength was never my ability to avoid a fight. It was my patience, my meticulous nature, and the quiet, undeniable truth of a well-archived email.